Hi, welcome. So we just looked at a few of the videos, and I will drop the links in the chat, so you guys can go and take a look at them. And Tiana, if you want to drop the YouTube in there as well. But for the remaining of our time, I'm going to go over a couple of documents. Cam is going to talk a little bit more about how to actually go about the process of joining as a member, and then we're going to open it up for some questions. So the first thing is kind of how we do our work at Fair Budget. So I know it's kind of like this idea of what the work we do, but it's really broken down into four things, which is advocacy and organizing, capacity building, constituent engagement, and information sharing. And so I'll talk a little bit more about the four ways folks can interact with those different pieces of Fair Budget. So the first being advocacy and organizing. So that's really like the core of our work. We bring together advocates, service providers, faith leaders, and constituents. I should have also included community leaders in there as well, but constituents who are directly impacted by poverty, to help us collectively develop our budget and policy goals. So if anybody has seen the work that we do, we put out an annual budget report, and that is kind of the baby of a fall worth of laboring. So that is done through our issue group structure, and I'll talk a little bit about how those issue group works next. So how folks can get engaged in that advocacy and organizing is both through our monthly membership meetings as well as through the monthly issue group meetings. So there's 6 different issue groups, and you can attend as many as you like if you are interested in all of them, or you can just be really super focused on one of them. The next is capacity building. So we recognize that a lot of the groups we work with, the budget is not their bread and butter. And then some of the things that we talk about more deeply are not things that folks are super familiar with. So we do engage in some capacity building by providing Budget 101 trainings and kind of some other related trainings. And Tiana can talk a little bit more about what that looks like.
Yes. You want me to go now?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay. So, for our workshops, I think the Budget 101 workshop is one of the most motivating workshops we've had and that we've been doing for a while. And that gives people a chance to hear about how their tax dollars impacts the DC government. And then it shows them how much power that they have to demand where those tax dollars go. And it ultimately, by the end of the workshop, gives people a reason or more confidence, I would say, in advocating in the budget and making sure that their priorities are there. So that was one of the impacts of Budget 101s, and we wanted to do more like respectability politics and identity politics so we can create a space for more people to have those conversations, because all of these different types of interpersonal communication forms and, past politics impacts how we interact with the DC budget. And I think a lot of people don't have a space to have these conversations. So we're going to be doing that as a form of our organizing as well.
Thanks, Tiana. We also do our constituent engagement. So y'all probably just saw the video of Kadir, who's one of our constituent leaders. But our constituent leadership program is a year-long cohort, which pulls from our member organizations. So, if you go to our website, you'll see our list of members. Some of them are direct service organizations. Some of them are policy orgs, but not all of them have the opportunity to actually be engaging in advocacy with their constituents. So we kind of recognized that and wanted to create a space where constituents could both learn more deeply about the budget, but also have a space for them to get together and be able to talk with each other and kind of develop their own policy and programmatic recommendations, which are uplifted into the group. And so that is a member perk. We don't go seeking constituents from all over the city. We really do try and keep it limited to a workable group of 15 to 20 constituents every year. And we also do stipend those constituents for their participation one of the things that we recognized pretty early on is that when you go into a lot of advocacy spaces, it is mostly just paid constituents. And so we wanted to carve out a space, or paid advocates, excuse me. We wanted to carve out a space for constituents, and also let them know that their time is just as valuable as ours. And so if we're being paid to show up to these um, advocacy spaces, we also wanted to be able to provide them with that stipend as well. And then lastly is information sharing. One thing I always say to people who come and interact with Fair Budget is that, I am not a housing policy expert. I am not a healthcare policy expert, but I don't have to be because we have folks at the table who are. I am not a native Washingtonian. There are a variety of spaces within advocacy that I don't necessarily hold, but because we are a collective of so many different people, we always have the opportunity to learn more from them. And so we have our monthly membership meetings, which are open to everyone. So folks here on the call, feel free, if after this you still want to learn a little bit more, you are definitely more than welcome to attend a membership meeting. And those are spaces where folks can strategize about the budget. You can kind of just learn more about issues that maybe you don't engage in. Maybe you do housing advocacy and want to learn more about what's going on in criminal justice, right? Those are the spaces that exist where you can kind of dig deeper into a policy issue that maybe is not your bread and butter. So these are all kind of the 4 ways that we work throughout the year to develop a progressive budget platform that we push forward. Pretty much January through March, it looked a little different this year, or excuse me, January through May, it looked a little different this year because of the pandemic. But really, we kick off the bulk of our work in September in advance for the fiscal year for the next. So this year, we're going to be addressing the FY22 budget. The FY21 budget begins for DC in October, and so the FY22 budget is the one that will be beginning in October of 2021. And so also included in this packet, which folks will have emailed to them, goes over kind of member rights and responsibilities, the issue group overview, structure, and decision making. Tiana, do you want to hop on to this part?
So what does it mean to be a Fair Budget Coalition member? Members have a list of rights that you have here. They have the opportunity to vote on the yearly budget platform. They also can recommend constituents to the FBC constituent leadership programs. So as we mentioned, Mary Center, Bread for the City, these are people that recommend constituents to us. And they can also attend and present at monthly meetings. So usually issue group chairs and members present on different legislation that the council is passing, or different issues that are affecting the community in different wards. And like I said before, they can lead issue groups. So members can also serve on the steering committee. We also have announced our steering committee recently. So all the updated information was sent out in a newsletter, because we also have bi-weekly newsletters that go out, and of course, newsletters that go out when we do have events like this. So FBC members can also lobby at meetings with elected and appointed government officials. So recently in February, we had a Love the People campaign where we released our budget report, and we went to council members' doors, and this was before the pandemic, and we gave them the report and let them know our budget recommendations, and we tried to kind of have a campaign around it with a nice theme. So that's what we did earlier this year. And lastly, you all can participate in multi-issue spaces to learn and gain information to support advocacy opportunities. So some of the responsibilities include collaborating and developing the budget and policy priorities for the coalition, collaborating on campaign strategies and tactics, while also participating in our monthly membership meetings to network, share information, and solicit support for your campaigns. So typically at the end of our membership meeting, we also have people share out any events that they would like to plug and have people go to. And in our newsletters, people could also let us know what events that they would like us to raise awareness for. And we also share job opportunities as well. And members can participate in the constituent leadership program, so they can come and present to the constituent leaders. DCFPI, they typically come and they do a testimony prep workshop with the constituent leaders. So there's a bunch of like creative and cross opportunities with the constituent leadership program. And then the fair budget staff, which is all of us on the call right now, we help do a lot of the programmatic work. So we convene the members and facilitate a development process. We promote advocacy efforts. We serve as the public vote of the coalition to the media and legislators and the executive staff. And then we publish the yearly budget, and we continue to, facilitate other networking opportunities. And then we conduct additional trainings and advocacy actions for members, and we manage the manual budget campaign. So those are some of the roles that we do as a staff.
Thanks, Tiana. And I will just briefly go over our issue groups.
Okay.
So the issue groups are basically how we do our work. We are a multi-issue coalition, one of the few in DC. So to give you a little bit of history, for those of you who have been around in DC for a while or know a little bit about how the DC budget has looked, in the 90s, DC was at risk of, having their budget taken over. And so one of the things that you will see, and predictions that we'll be seeing it in this upcoming budget as well. So I think now is like a particularly important time for us to bond together, is that government, when there are deficits, begin to look at austerity measures. And so that means cutting social service funding. And so in the 90s when this happened, prior to our founding, we were seeing housing folks being pitted against healthcare folks, being pitted against food folks. So they were telling housing advocates, we can't give you the money for emergency rental assistance, because if we give it to you, then we're going to have to cut it from school breakfast, right? When all of us who do this work know that, somebody who might need emergency rental, if they have a child, that child also needs free school breakfast, right? So a lot of these things work together. If somebody's in poverty, one thing is not going to be like a silver bullet to kind of cure poverty, at least not working within the current confines of the system. And so we know that all of these things are necessary to begin to sort of dismantle some of these systemic oppressions that exist. And so these groups, all 6 of them, meet on a monthly basis. Folks can be as involved as in, I don't think we have anybody who's in all 6 member groups, but it is a possibility for folks to join the groups that they're most interested in, and help to kind of steer that group in terms of what is added to our budget platform. So Tiana, I guess for this current budget season, I am the primary advocacy contact, and I will be dropping my email address in the chat. And folks, if after we go through this, you kind of are like, oh, this is the group I want to join, email me, let me know. I'm happy to add you to the listserv, even if you're not clear about whether membership is right for you or not. Definitely still a good space to kind of get the chance to chat with folks. So Tiana, you can go ahead to the next page. So the first issue group I'll talk a little bit about. Actually, I'll let you talk about this one, Tiana, because this is the one you're going to be leading this year.
So this is the Economic Justice Issue Group, and on our document it says, DC's poorest families have seen a dramatic loss since the Great Recession, as their income is now lower than in most major cities. Income inequality also is far higher here than in most U.S. cities. The district must invest in our lowest income residents, protect workers, and make sure that all 8 wards and all income levels have access to resources they need to thrive. So a lot of the issues that we have been advocating for in the economic justice group has been exacerbated since COVID. And one of the main things that we've been working on in the economic justice group was childcare. So Megan is also listed here who has been working a lot with childcare on how parents are able to continue to take care of their kids during a pandemic. Many people are taking care of kids at home without compensation. So we're going to be looking at ways that people can be compensated for their work, even though they are home, or finding ways to make sure that when childcare facilities do open back up, there are safety procedures. So those are some of the issues that we'll specifically be talking about in the economic justice group. But as you can see here, there are a past list of things we've advocated for, like employment discrimination, income support, paid family leave. So there are a lot of issues that we'll address, and one popular one was wage theft as well. But right now, Megan and I specifically have background on childcare. And we actually will be having our first meeting at the last week of this month.
Yeah, and those meetings are typically advertised in our newsletters that Tiana sends out. So the next issue group we're going to talk a little bit about is our community safety issue group. And so we kind of take a maybe different approach to community safety than other groups do. When they talk about community safety, they're talking about more police. We're explicitly not talking about more police. In fact, we are talking about ways that we can take kind of the power away from police and invest it into other ways that we are keeping our community safe. So this group, one of our conveners of the group is actually Dawn Dalton from the DC Coalition Against Domestic Violence. So you will see that there are quite a few things that we have advocated for in the past that directly have to do with domestic violence and survivors and being able to support them. This group also has dealt with immigrant rights. So you'll see that we've also worked on legal aid for immigrants. And so those were those grants that came out these past couple of years, which we are a major contributor to. As well as talking about, and so ACLU DC is also a part of this group, so is Black Lives Matter. And so we do talk about how to get away from the age of mass incarceration, detention, and deportation. So we've had things in here like the NEAR Act. We have funding for OPC, which is the Office of Police Complaints, which is well as interpersonal and community violence. Tana, if you could go to the next group.
Sorry, when I'm trying to get my mute to come back, it won't. Okay. You went mute at a point when you were talking about police, like divesting from police. So I don't know if you wanted to go back just a little, like 30 seconds.
Sure, yeah. So basically the last part of here summarizes that, the community safety group works to support programs that divert people away from the justice system, that supports victims and survivors of crime, as well as decriminalizing poverty. So really looking at some systems outside of policing that help our communities to live better and safer lives.
Okay.
Thanks, Tiana. The next one is healthcare. I'm sure that even before the pandemic occurred, anybody who's lived in DC for even a month can see that there's a huge disparity in healthcare access in DC. One of the most stark ones that really hit me as somebody who was pregnant and lives east of the river is the maternal mortality rate in Southeast DC, where you look at actually wards 5, 7, and 8 do not have any access to prenatal care. And so we know that not only in DC is access to healthcare a race issue, but also a class issue, which goes kind of straight down the line of low income, long-term Washingtonians who don't have access to healthcare. And that our definition of healthcare is both explicitly mental and physical healthcare for all residents. And so some of the work we've done in that group, taking it back, Betty Gentle of So Others Might Eat chairs that group, along with Mark Lavoda from the DC Behavioral Health Association. So we both have kind of a perspective of a direct service provider, as well as somebody who is working with some of these other service providers. So some of the things we've advocated for in this group include the Healthcare Alliance program, which is the only insurance program in DC which covers undocumented immigrants, but has been underfunded and had programmatic barriers for enrollment for a long time, as well as school-based mental health services for students, Healthy Steps and Healthy Futures, which are both early childhood programs that to give aid to parents before their child goes to school and helps identify any issues, as well as monitoring environmental health concerns in areas of intense development, including areas like Buzzard Point, where we saw them build a whole soccer stadium without any concern to kind of what was happening to Greenleaf, where some of the highest rates of asthma exist in the city already, and kind of no sort of remediation or did any study before beginning this intense development. So those are some of the things that have fallen under the healthcare issue group. Tiana, do you want to take taxes?
So the Fair Taxes group also meets monthly like the rest of them, and this says here that the city has a $15 billion budget, $15 billion budget, and is more prosperous than ever, yet every year human services needs are severely underfunded. Each year the administration funds public deals and administrators land giveaways to wealthy individuals and corporations. FBC's position is that DC residents need to be prioritized over developers, and the wealthy individuals need to pay their fair share. So this year, our sentiments were exactly that. We wanted to make sure, and we were demanding a just recovery, but we were also specifically asking for people above a certain income to be taxed more in order to meet the needs that are to meet our budget ask that we had this year. So that included a bunch of different progressive tax revenue ideas that came out of this group. And Tazra Mitchell is the chair, and she is a policy director at DCFPI. And I think one of the wins we got was eliminating ineffective corporate tax loopholes. I think we got somewhere with that, or was it the QHTC, or is that the same thing?
Yeah, that's the QHTC. That is one of many corporate tax breaks we want to eliminate, but yes, we were pretty successful in that, as well as I think folks probably read about Events DC giving money to excluded workers this year, and I think we really set the stage for that last year when we found their excess pot of money that we believe they were saving for the Washington football team to return to RFK, and we're able to tap into that for public housing repairs at the $25 million last year.
So as you can see from some of these examples, DC has the money to fund a lot of our concerns, but they continue in a lot of the hearings and other public briefings to find ways around funding what we need by saying that the money isn't there. And especially when we've reached reserves, goals for our reserves, we wanted to tap into those to make sure that our demands are funded. So this group talks about all of those different issues and figure out where the money can come from and what tax ideas are progressive rather than regressive, so that we aren't impacting communities that we are trying to fund helpful programs in. So next is the Housing Security Issue Group, and this group works to ensure that there is affordable housing in DC. So affordable housing is the most most pressing issue affecting the district, with the crisis most concentrated among our extremely low-income residents. The district must focus its resources on creating units and vouchers for people experiencing homelessness and making 0 to 30% AMI, preserving affordable housing, eliminating barriers for tenants, and improving services and shelters for individuals experiencing homelessness. So this is one of our most popular issue groups. The chairs are Brittany Ruffin and Amy from Bread for the City, and Brittany is from the Washington Legal Clinic. So this group helps spearhead a lot of our housing concerns and helps prep people for housing hearings as well. And one of the issues is that a lot of housing that is being made in DC, they don't always fall between the 0 to 30% AMI, which I believe is basically making sure your income is like under 30,000 a year. So a lot of the housing, 40?
30,000 for a family of 4.
30,000 for a family of 4.
So yeah, are making the least amount, but some of them still are excluded from programs like voucher program or public housing, which have very long wait lists that have been closed for a really long time.
Mm-hmm. So this group is pretty popular because housing is one of the biggest issues in DC. DC has more and more luxury buildings with vacant rooms. So we are really trying to work that more housing is being built, especially with more bedrooms. A lot of people are starting to demand that there are more than just 2 bedrooms being built. They want 3 bedrooms, they want 4 bedrooms. So I'm really interested to see how that conversation goes, and potentially in this housing group, as well as a housing workshop develops, we'll be talking more about what is it for the city to own more housing rather than just making public housing, if that makes sense, to just own more property for people to move in and have those housing be a public good rather than private businesses owned by separate landlords. So I'm really interested to see some of the discussions that come out of the housing group this budget season.
And while I think all our groups are pretty progressive and radical, I would say from the housing group, we definitely are getting some of those campaigns that are really making a demand for people to be able to stay in DC. As we see, gentrification has hit DC in a really major way. If you've lived in DC for more than a second, you'll see neighborhoods rapidly changing. And so I think this group aims to kind of get to like, what is it that I think more so than other housing platforms in the city, asking for what the need is versus what is politically palatable. So from our group, from the housing group, you might see dollar amounts that give you sticker shock. It's because it's expensive to provide housing. And while the mayor oftentimes touts her investments, we know that those aren't enough, and they aren't specific enough to the communities who are most impacted. And lastly, we have our food issue group and food access issue group. And this is pretty self-explanatory. Basically, 79% of DC's grocery stores are concentrated in the 4 wards whose residents are primarily high income and white. In comparison, when you look at DC's lowest income wards, so Ward 7 and Ward 8, we share 4 grocery stores. So that in itself contributes to widespread food insecurity, along with related poor health outcomes. And this is a failure of public policy, just plain and simple. And so in this moment, we are continuing to advocate for community grocery stores. DC continues to provide tax breaks to places like Walmart, who come in and build in every ward and then pull out of Ward 8. And so making sure we're really intentional, and also, through the providing things like the Dream Grants that Washingtonians can be opening up businesses in their own communities and hiring people from the communities as well. So that's one of the things this group has advocated for. Other things such as SNAP, which is otherwise known as food stamps expansion. We are one of the very few states well, not state, but we're one of the very few places in the country that does not have online SNAP application. And as we're in this global pandemic now, you can tell that had we had that infrastructure in place, before this hit, we would have been in a much better place for our families who are relying on SNAP to get through the month. We've also advocated for an elderly simplified application. Many of us who know seniors who are on fixed incomes, their income is not drastically changing year to year. And so we've been advocating for a one-pager to be able to have it be nice and simple, eliminate the need for seniors to go recertify in person. If you've ever been to a service center, or if you've ever driven past a service center in the morning, you know that the lines are long and they're not accessible for somebody who maybe can't stand in line and wait for 2-3 hours, who can't, physically get up by 6 a.m. to be waiting in line on, South Capitol. So trying to make food more accessible as well as food resources more accessible. And Melissa Jensen of DC Hunger Solutions is the chair of that group. Next, just to quickly kind of go over the coalition structure. I'm sure you can't see all the details of that, but basically the coalition is comprised of organizational members and individual members. So those are our, thanks Tiana, those are the two folks who make up our membership, which is kind of why y'all are here today. Hopefully we can recruit you to become a member. Those are the folks who convene, who work through our issue groups, who help us to develop our budget and policy agendas. And so those are the folks who we do this work with regularly. We also have our constituent leaders, where Tiana talked already a little bit about them, but they are separated out from our members just because they are a leadership body of our group. And so, we do hope to prioritize the voices of folks who are most directly impacted by poverty, because they can explicitly tell you what does and doesn't work about this program, right? Versus somebody who is really only looking at it from like a policy or a theoretical side. We have our steering committee, who is the governing body of our organization, who directs our programmatic efforts. So they are voted on every year from our membership. They are members who decide to step up and take leadership positions. And you can take a look at our current steering committee, which has, I think, representation from all of our issue groups, as well as 2 former constituent leaders who are serving on our steering committee. Because we are not a 501c3, we are a fiscally sponsored organization. We are not required to have a board. However, a few years ago, when I first started at Fair Budget, we did find it necessary to kind of pull out some of those like larger pieces that, a board would do. So direction of the organization, hiring for the director, financial oversight, and fundraising. So most folks who work within Fair Budget don't interact too much with our executive committee, but they're there and important to include in here. And then lastly is FBC staff. We are super important, although we do not have a vote. So just to be like super clear, when Fair Budget endorses things, when Fair Budget puts together our budget platform, those are things that the staff does not have a vote on. We do not contribute in that way to the direction of the organization. However, we do set kind of the direction, and we are able to then determine like what type of advocacy we're gonna do. So this year, our full-time staff members are myself, Stephanie, Mizaki, who is currently on a leave of absence. He is the advocacy manager. Tiana, who's a budget organizer, and Cam, I am sorry, I just could not fit your name in, but Cam here is with us as the admin assistant. And so those are the 4 of us who really primarily take care of this work on a day-to-day basis. And all of the 3 folks who are listed here can be reached at firstname@fairbudget.org. And then lastly, and I'm not going to go over this too deeply, y'all can access this on our website or through this document when it's sent to you. But this is our decision-making rubric, and it's something that we collaboratively put together probably 4 or 5 years ago at this point, which really determines how we make our decisions, how we decide what's going to be on our platform. And so we look at every recommendation that comes in through kind of 4 lenses. Tiana, can you scroll down 1 more page? Nope, that's not it. It's all right. So basically, something can get a 1 through 4. So we have source of recommendation, which is who's making the recommendation. Is it a group of white policy advocates on Connecticut Ave who are making the decision, or is it a community group that came together with directly impacted residents? And so weighing on one end of the spectrum to the next is kind of how we're going to determine how deeply this recommendation is rooted in the community. We also have support behind the initiative. As you see, we are a staff of 3.5. And so we do not have the capacity to take on every single issue. We want to know that there's already kind of a base of support. And while that doesn't mean that if there's no base of support, we're not going to advocate for it, it is really helpful for us if you've already begun doing this grassroots building on your own to be able to establish some support behind the recommendation. The next is building power. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but is this recommendation serving to build power within the community that it is hoping to address? What type of roles exist within your coalition? What type of leadership is being formed? How are you working within this? Is this kind of a top-down structure that is reinforcing some of those other things that we find to be problematic? Next page. And then racial justice. So if you see kind of the categories, 1 would be colorblind, and 4 would be racial justice. Even how you speak about your recommendation, right? So we have people who make recommendations to us, and they're saying this is an issue of racial justice because it affects Black people. That's not an issue of racial justice. Versus an issue of racial justice where it says that, you know, we have seen Black people organizing around this. This is an issue that they care about. This is one where they already have, you know, determined that this is the best course of action, and these are the ways that we're going to execute it, and these are the ways that it actually serves to break down some of those systemic barriers that are serving to kind of reinforce things versus maybe like a more Band-Aid approach. And I think is that the last page? Okay, yeah. Awesome. So quick overview, but obviously y'all will be able to get this in the packet and read through it yourself. But those are how we aim to make our decisions at Fair Budget. So we do really want to be thoughtful and intentional about how we make policy suggestions, how we endorse things. And I think it really is helpful for us to be able to build community with folks because they know that we're not just, you know, making endorsements for anybody, and that we are really thoughtful. Our steering committee is really thoughtful about the work that we're doing and not wanting to replicate harm through our recommendations. And of course, you know, there are policies that are not necessarily intentionally harmful that end up being so. And I think that we try to kind of mitigate that by having such a comprehensive decision-making process. And as our steering committee can tell you, it gets very hairy when we're doing the voting and we're doing the scoring, but it's really worth it and gives us like a deeper sense of where these issues come from and if we're really truly addressing the root cause of the issue or if we're doing a surface level kind of analysis. So I think that's it for the presentation of the packet. And the next thing that we wanted to kind of do was just kick it over to Cam, who can talk to us about membership, what that looks like in terms of like actually joining and becoming a fair budget member. And I see Tiana taking it over to the membership tab.
Thank you, Tiana. Okay, cool. So there's a couple ways that folks can learn more about membership. One of those ways is through the membership page on the website. And if you go down a little bit for me, Tiana, there's a couple ways, a couple links for you to use. At the bottom of the screen, there is a Google form, which gives you the ability to enter all of your organization's information, email address, what issue group are you interested in joining, things like that. And so go up a little bit more for me, Tiana. There's also a couple links for you to use. We do want to note that folks should, if you are sending the check, please send it to the physical sponsor, which is Social Good Fund, and they're located in California. So make sure you get that updated information, as well as if you just want to pay online. There's a bit.ly for you to use. And just keep it in mind, there'll be an additional 4% transaction fee, which we are just asking those who are supporting the work and joining in this work to support in paying for. And so, yeah, so the two ways to pay and renew membership is paying online, as well as mailing checks in to the physical sponsor, as well as like an opportunity to talk with me or any of the folks from Fair Budget around like specific needs, and how we could support you in this process of becoming a member. And so there's also opportunity for folks who may not be able to pay organization membership dues. If that is an issue, feel free to reach out to me or again anyone from Fair Budget. And so if there's any way that like we can make this process more accessible for you, if you want to call and we walk through the application, or have someone from your organization call and walk through the application, all of those ways are options. And my email address was just put in the chat, so feel free to reach out to me, and we can schedule some time to talk. I think that's about it, unless you want to add anything else, Stephanie.
Thanks, Cam. That was great. The only other thing I would mention, and Tiana, if you could scroll down a little bit, is just that right there. For dues, we do have what we feel, we have modeled what we want DC government to do in terms of taxes. And we have a due structure that aligns with organizational budget. So if your annual budget is less than $250,000, that's $150. If it's over $5 million, it's $2,000. So we want bigger orgs who have big budgets to pay what they should. But then we also, like Cam mentioned, it is more important for us to have folks at the table working with us than to get their funds. And so if you are from a small organization, a grassroots organization, and $150 is a barrier, like reach out to us. We don't want that to prevent you from becoming a member. And the same with the individual members dues. We have 2 paid options, so that's $50. And then if you have extra funds, and want to support a constituent, we have the pay it forward option, which is $50 membership and sponsoring a fee waiver for another member. And then of course, if $50 is a barrier to you, we don't want it to be, contact Cam and request a fee waiver. So yeah, that's it for membership. Thanks, Cam.